then she proceeds to chastise me for helping someone with their accent. She said, we're all just learning languages and you shouldn't be trying to correct people on their accent and how to pronounce things. You're listening to Accent Amazing, where we combine language, linguistics, and history to help you improve your pronunciation and make your accent amazing. Hey everyone, welcome back to Accent Amazing. Today, I want to dive into a question that's been on my mind for a while. Is improving or changing your accent a form of betraying your culture? For some, an accent is just a way of speaking, but for others, it's deeply tied to identity. If you've ever felt self-conscious about your accent or struggled with language identity or even wondered whether changing the way you speak means losing a part of yourself, this episode is for you. I have personal stories, insights, and even a little linguistics to unpack, so let's get into it. During the pandemic, I was doing a lot of language exchanges. I was working on Russian a lot. I took a lot of online classes and taught myself how to touch type Russian even without a Russian keyboard, as in it shows my Latin letters on the keyboard that I have. By the way, I'm really surprised that many Europeans and Russians don't learn how to type in school. Like I noticed them typing with three fingers, like looking at the keyboard, and I'm like, we learned this in school, and it makes so much sense to learn this, and it's super efficient, so it should be taught. But anyway, this Russian guy I was doing a language exchange with, English to Russian and Russian to English, when I told him I was an accent coach, and that the majority of my students were Russian speakers who wanted to sound less Russian and more native in English, he was surprised, and he said he doesn't want to lose his Russian accent because he's Russian. That's who he is. And by the way, as a disclaimer, that's completely fine. I don't think people should have to lose their accent. I like accents. I think it's a really cool thing about linguistics and culture. But if a student wants to sound more native and sound less identifiably foreign, that's their decision, and I'm here to help them. This is also why I don't actively advertise to people saying that they should take my classes. I only advertise that if they want to, then they can. And that's how I help them, if they wish for it. But this guy, when he mentioned that he wanted to keep his Russian accent because he's Russian, this was new to me, but it made sense. Your accent, just like your face, your skin color, your language, of course, can be an indicator of where you're from. And for some people, losing that might feel like they're losing a part of where they're from. And so for him, he identifies with his accent, and he identifies with his culture through his accent, which is fine. Even native speakers and myself, we identify with our accents. Which brings me to my second story. I used to date a British girl for maybe 3 years or so. So she lived in New York. I was living in New York at the time. And so she lived in New York, I don't know, 5, 6 more years, probably 8, 9 years now, I'm not sure. But for many years, she still kept up with her accent. In fact, for me, and I'm sure for others, it was one of the defining aspects of that people thought of when thinking about her, was the way that she spoke. But I mean, the British accent does hold a lot of cultural weight and value in the English-speaking world, so it makes sense. A lot of people find it fairly sexy, attractive, and by the way, I have to mention that there are many British accents, and I'm talking about a fairly standard, ever so slightly posh, I think, estuary-style English. Slightly more towards the posher side. It's not quite RP, not quite like the King's English, but very close. She said she would call the letter H, but she said H, not H. And she said she definitely didn't say bottle of water, but rather bottle of water. She would say something like that. So it's it's a little bit more towards the posher side, I think. I'm not English, I'm not British, so people might be wrong there, so you can tell me in the comments. But yeah, there's a fun meme about British people where when they meet someone from the outside of the British cultural sphere, I suppose, or there's like a foreigner visiting or something, and then they'll become more British to kind of show off or display their culture. So they might say, "Do you want a spot of tea?" So this kind of spot of tea becomes sort of a indicator of British culture. I think it's a posh sort of expression. So the meme says something like, a foreigner has arrived and you have entered hyper-British mode, and so that's when you say, "You fancy a spot of tea?" And so this sort of this meme does speak to the fact that you can be proud of your culture, and there are certain ways that you can show off the culture and exhibit the culture through accent and like how the way you speak. So that aspect, I think, really demonstrates that you can, that there is this um, identity through the accent, right? And then let's get to the third story. So I grew up in Hong Kong, but I actually don't speak Cantonese very well, which is kind of an identity issue. It's kind of embarrassing. Since I'm from Hong Kong, I should speak Cantonese, and everyone thinks I should speak Cantonese. I do speak it, I can get by with it, but I don't speak it super well, and I do have an accent. Hong Kong is a majority Cantonese speaking city, but it's not completely Cantonese. I think it's like 70% Cantonese people, and there's Hakkas, and then there's Shanghainese as well. So my family is actually mostly originally from the Shanghai region. So a lot of my ancestors and my relatives spoke Shanghainese. Only my mom speaks Cantonese fluently, I think. My dad's from the US, and on his side, it's mostly Mandarin and some Shanghainese, I think. Yeah, so I don't speak it super well, which is ironic because I'm an accent coach. But I think tonal languages are kind of difficult to work on with regards to accents, just because when you do a tone, it's about the pitch rather than putting your tongue in a particular place. And when you're doing consonants, for example, you can put your tongue in a particular place, and you'll know that you're doing it right. But with tones, sorry, it's just about the pitch. So that's why I think it's a bit harder. But yeah, my tones are not super good, and when I was younger, I could only say four of the six tones, and now I can do all six of them, but I'm not super good at like identifying it. And you don't actually have to speak Cantonese to survive in Hong Kong. Anyway, I went to an international school, and that's why like I didn't need to speak that much Cantonese. We learned Mandarin, and we actually weren't allowed to speak Cantonese, which made it hard for me to learn Cantonese. And so at home, I spoke a lot of English because my dad spoke English. He's from the U.S. That's his first tongue. My mom spoke English. Uh, and my grandparents also spoke English. So everyone spoke English, but all the Chinese languages were different. So the most efficient thing was just to learn English for me. And then we couldn't speak it in school either. So now I don't really speak Cantonese very well, but I'm getting better. But I still get kind of embarrassed because people always think that I'm from, outside of Hong Kong, even though I'm from Hong Kong. I am American, but I grew up in Hong Kong. This is a little embarrassing for me. But nowadays, I have been identifying more as an American because it's an easier mold to fit into, as Americans just mostly think I'm from America based on how I talk, until I tell them I actually never grew up there. I lived there for a long time, but my dad and my extended family are all from the US. But yeah, it's an easier role to fit into. And finally, the fourth story that I wanted to get into, and this is a really interesting one. It still haunts me to this day. Or maybe haunts is not the right word, but it's stuck with me. This happened during college. I was a linguistics student at the University of Pennsylvania, which has a great linguistics department, and is actually one of the oldest modern linguistic departments in the US. Anyway, so I lived in a dorm which had a modern languages residential program with different language houses where there would be activities based around culture and language, such as La Maison Française, Deutsche Haus, and Rусский Dom. Most of the students living there were into languages and culture. Yeah, we were all language nerds. I'd attend many of these language events. One time at the French gathering, I think it was the French gathering, my roommate's girlfriend, who was learning French at the time, had trouble with the French U sound and asked me for help because she knew that I studied phonetics and linguistics and I spoke French. And so naturally I helped her. It was fairly simple to apply phonetic knowledge to help her pronounce and enunciate and articulate the U sound, which most native speakers of English find very difficult because we don't have the U sound in English. A lot of English speakers will therefore just pronounce U as U or U, so they'll end up saying the words tu and tu the same, and vu and vous the same, even though those are completely different sounds. They are different phonemes, U and U. As you may know if you've listened to other podcasts with me or just know some phonetics and linguistics, these are phonemes. U and U are phonemes in French, and so there's a lot of word pairs that differentiate themselves only based on whether they have U or U. So it's really important to know how to pronounce these sounds, otherwise you can't really be easily understood in French. So I told her how to pronounce it. It's basically the same as an English E sound, but you have to have your mouth in a round shape. So it's like you're sucking out of a straw. And so you keep your lips rounded, really rounded, and then try to say E, but don't move your lips. So it ends up being like U. And there you have an U sound, and that's the phoneme. So it was pretty simple to explain that, and she was pretty happy because she now knew how to differentiate tu and tu and vous and vu. And so I thought that was that. I didn't think too much about it because it's pretty normal that I would help my friends with pronunciation, and I did this all throughout university. They knew that I was very into languages, and I knew how to make sounds and accents and that sort of stuff. And so this was kind of a precursor to my accent coach career. But then the next day comes, and I was at the cafeteria, and there was this other girl who had been at the event, and she came and sat at my table where I'd been eating alone because, you know, I was just going to go to class afterwards. But she seemed very stern. Normally, she's pretty bubbly and stuff. She said we had to talk, and I was like, okay, we have to talk. Kind of a weird phrasing. We were just kind of acquaintances. So I was like, yeah, what's up? And then she proceeds to chastise me for helping someone with their accent. She said, you know, we're all just learning languages, and you shouldn't be trying to correct people on their accent and how to pronounce things. Something about that. It was definitely a bit longer. The conversation lasted several minutes, but I don't remember exactly what she said. The gist of it was that she was upset that I was helping someone else with their accent, and she seemed offended by it somehow. I don't remember exactly how I responded, but I thought it was silly since my friend's girlfriend, she was the one who had asked me to help her, and she was very happy that I helped her pronounce the U sound. Yet this girl, who wasn't even involved, was so upset with me that she had to talk specifically about it. But this girl did study loads of languages, and she spoke a lot of them: French, Spanish, Italian, German, Russian, Chinese, Korean. She spoke all of those, and some of those were her majors. I think one or two of those languages she had as a double major. However, she did have a super American English accent in all those languages. So she would say things like, "Hola, soy de California y yo hablo español," like that, with a really English accent. And then she would say things like, you know, "Je parle français," and then add on, "И тоже я могу говорить русский чуть-чуть, потому что я хочу читать Dostoevsky," which is true. She did like to learn these languages to be able to read literature, and she could read very well, but like when she spoke, it was completely an American accent in all of her languages. So, you know, she was really good at understanding things and she could read them, but her accent was, from the first 2 seconds, you would know that she was an American English speaker. So I think this is perhaps why she was insecure, I suppose, or like she felt threatened that I was helping people with their accents. I think she might have felt threatened about her own sense of self. She probably had a fixed mindset, which leads me to what I actually think about how people view their accent. This is my view of people's identity and accent now. I really believe it depends on how you identify with your accent. This ties into what's called growth versus fixed mindset. And so according to what I've read about briefly, and of course I'm no expert in this, but people with what's called a fixed mindset see traits like intelligence or abilities as set in stone, and they avoid challenges and feel threatened by others' success, and often view their current abilities as unchangeable. So I completely took that from ChatGPT when I asked about it, but I have heard about these ideas a lot before, and it sounds about right. And so that's a fixed mindset, and I think she had a fixed mindset. If you have a growth mindset, you see skills and abilities as things that can be developed. Those with a growth mindset are more likely to persevere, embrace challenges, and take inspiration from others rather than feeling threatened. So I think that my classmates' reaction to seeing me help other people with the pronunciation might have come from a fixed mindset, seeing her accent as part of her identity and that she couldn't or shouldn't change it, and she felt uncomfortable with me trying to help others change their accent. So I think that's what was happening, and I think it's an extreme case. There's definitely less extreme cases where people just think that they can't change their accent, and that's not true. I've helped a lot of people with their accent through my training, through my courses. But yeah, personally, my accent shifts depending on the context, and that doesn't mean I'm any less Chinese or Hong Kong or American. It just means that I can adapt. So my identity is not purely on how exactly my accent is, but more about me and how, I adapt to different situations and how I can improve and that sort of stuff. It isn't a static thing. Maybe my core sense of self is more static, but the accent can change and it's flexible, and language is part of that flexibility. So for example, for me, when I learn a language, I want to sound more native. I love phonetics and I enjoy mastering pronunciation. When it comes to my English, I actually sound different now, the way that I'm talking, than how I talked when I was a kid. I had more of a British and Cantonese sort of accent in English, and it was kind of, it was native. People still thought I was American, but like if you listen closely and you listen long enough, it would sound more obvious that it's not fully American. But now the way that I'm speaking and the way that I teach is a lot more American. I did change a lot of things. So for example, when I was a kid, I differentiated father and bother as the Brits did, but not how Americans do it. So I would say bother, or actually no, I wouldn't say bother. I'd say bother, right, with the aw sound, and then father with an aw sound. So two different vowels. I would still pronounce the r's. It wouldn't be completely British. It wouldn't be like don't bother my father. I would say don't bother my father. And so that aw and ah is very rare in American English. It happens, I think, in Boston English, but nowhere else in the North American regions where they speak English. And then one other big thing is that I do prenasal ash tensing. I used to say hand, and now I say hand. And I do this all the time now. I say hand, understand. I don't change it actually. It's pretty fixed now, but it used to be hand. It used to be understand. But then things like oh and ah, it shifts a bit when I'm back in Hong Kong, like with my friends. So I'd definitely, for example, use a lot of British terms when I'm back in Hong Kong. So I'd say lift and rubbish bin. And another big one is that I say mum. Like I don't like saying mom. This one is kind of weird. I personally just don't like the word mom, the pronunciation. It sounds better as mum, and so I just say mum all the time. But when I'm teaching or when I'm in the US and around Americans, I don't say lift or rubbish bin. I say elevator and trash can. But when I'm back in Hong Kong, I will say lift and rubbish bin. But I always say mum. So that's just a personal thing. That's a personal thing, preference for me. And you can have your own personal preference. You can pick and choose certain things, and still, it's your idiolect. Idio meaning self-lect, meaning like a way of speaking, just like dialect and idiolect and regionalect. So anyway, accent can be a strong part of identity. Some people hold on to it for years, like my British ex. Another funny thing is that when I was in the UK, I actually became more British sounding on purpose, and I'd say half. I can't. Like I did that on purpose to blend in, but it didn't feel to me like I was betraying my culture. I was just having a little bit of fun. But then yeah, that was a year of my life when I was in the UK, and I was saying aw, like can't, grass, and afterwards, that sort of stuff. Like I didn't fully make it British, but it was a fun thing I did. It still didn't, change who I was. But yeah, so an accent can be a strong part of identity, and many people hold on to it for years. But really, whether or not it's betraying your culture is based on how you think it's betraying your culture, if you think it's betraying your culture. And this ties into growth and fixed mindsets. So if you have a growth mindset, and this is often supposedly more helpful because you're more able to change, and you're able to adapt and things. So if you have a growth mindset, you're more able to change and improve. So and you're more likely to really feel that changing your accent won't really change who you are, and you don't feel threatened by it. If you have a fixed mindset, Well, I think that's more likely to make you feel uncomfortable if you're trying to change things, and you may feel like you're betraying your culture. But I think a lot of my students are into self-improvement. They want to sound more native, and they're okay with working on their accent because I don't think that challenges their sense of self. And then people who have fixed mindsets and they don't want to improve their accent or don't want to work on their accent, that's which is completely fine. It's totally up to them. And I'm not trying to tell people they should change their accent, but like I feel like a lot of them would not try at all. So they're probably not my students. So yeah, personally, my accent shifts on context. Doesn't mean I'm any less Chinese or Hong Konger. But yeah, what do you think? Have you ever felt like your accent is tied to your identity, your language? Have you struggled with changing it or keeping it? What about when you're learning new languages? Tell me your thoughts. You can email me, you can comment here, and yeah, so that's all for now. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you next time on Accent Amazing.